History says Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, but Black history states it's not quite true. Detail right now. You know the story. In the beginning, Edison's incandescent lamp would only burn for a few hours, and that just wasn't going to cut it. What made the electric light commercially viable was the longer-lasting carbon filament created by this man, Lewis Howard Latimer. Mechanical draftsman by trade, Latimer is also credited for creating the drawings and successful patent application for Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. But his work, which made the electric light usable, has been ignored, obscured, in some cases omitted by most historians. However, a new book called Lewis Latimer, The First Hidden Figure, setting the record straight. The author is Steve Mitnick, joins us from Washington, D.C. to straighten this all out. Steve, how are you?
Thanks, Elliot. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for coming in and doing this today. And we've talked before. I must say, I've been down this road for about 20 years now with the story of Lewis Latimer, but your book seems to put everything in context and straighten a few things out. I'm very eager to talk about it. But first of all, let's talk about this clip that just came up a couple of weeks ago. This is September 3rd. This is the president in Kenosha, Wisconsin, speaking at a town forum after working or talking to the family of Jacob Blake, a black man who was shot and wounded by police. He's referencing Lewis Latimer and makes this statement. Take a look.
For example, why in God's name don't we teach history in history classes? A black man invented the light bulb, not a white guy named Edison. Okay?
All right. Is he correct? Did Lewis Latimer invent the light bulb?
It's a great statement, and it's got a good element of truth, but there's much more to the story.
How so?
Thomas Edison was a great man, but as was Lewis Latimer. And in effect, they were the competitors. Lewis Latimer was the chief of the lighting group for Hiram Maxim's company. And Thomas Edison they were the competitors. And contemporary accounts say that Maxim and Latimer had the better bulb. And always had the stronger patent.
Okay, so that brings me up to my second question. Did Thomas Edison steal the invention? Because basically what we're talking about here is the improved filament. We all learned that as children. Thomas Edison had a light bulb as well as a lot of other people at the time. But what made his different was the filament, which wouldn't last long, only a few hours. So he came along with a more improved filament. He patented that, and voila, Thomas Edison gets credit for inventing the light bulb. Did he steal that filament from Lewis Latimer?
Well, the Edison's bulb, which he showed to the press in December of 1880 and masterfully publicized it in January and then submitted the patent in February, quickly won the results, won the patent. He had a great group to mechanize that invention. Meanwhile, leaving Latimer and Hiram Maxim and U.S. Electric Lighting in the dust as far as the publicity. As far as did he steal it? Edison was a master at finance, gathering the smartest scientists and engineers together and getting a lot of the credit. And of course, he was a great technician and engineer and scientist himself. But yeah, the Latimer filament was longer lasting, and Latimer also patented a better way to manufacture the filament,
right?
That it could be economical.
So let's talk about the timeline a little bit. Tell me if I've got this correct. By 1880, Hiram Maxim and Edison are both working on very advanced electric lights. The difference is Hiram Maxim has Latimer working for him at the time, and he has a more improved carbon filament. Am I heading down the right road so far?
Yeah, not only that, but quite uniquely, Maxim, who was brilliant, but he put Latimer in charge of the entire lighting division. And there must have been no place in the Western world where an African American was supervising 30 white men, engineers, scientists, some of the top of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So at that point, both are working on it. In 1880, Edison submits his patent for the incandescent lamp with the carbon filament, the more improved one. This is 1880. And Latimer's over with Hiram Maxim. Latimer has a carbon filament that he's working on, but he hasn't patented it yet. Edison patents this bulb very quickly, I understand. The year later, I think 1881, February, Latimer submits his patent, but it takes much longer. How close am I?
Oh, yeah. We use the term these days called vaporware. And that first bulb from Edison, it was effectively vaporware. It was a great development, but it wasn't going to be economical at a large scale, at the scale that Edison wanted. It took those two developments, patents from Latimer, to make the bulb more economical so that it could light the world.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Incredible. So is it safe to say that Edison knew of this carbon filament improvement that had been made by Latimer at the time that Latimer was working with Maxim in 1880? The only difference is Latimer just didn't get to the patent office quick enough?
No, first of all, absolutely. Edison definitely knew what was going on with Maxim and Latimer and any other. And the proof of the pudding, my favorite story about Lewis Latimer is that a couple years later in 1882, Latimer's now on his own. Maxim has gone to Europe, and Edison sues Lewis Latimer over his patent. He actually sues him. Now, Thomas Edison, he's got, how many lawyers, the top, from the best schools, expert witnesses. Poor Lewis Latimer is living in a one-room apartment, okay? So Edison's team crushes in the courts, crushes Latimer, and the suit eventually is settled in 1884. And what does Edison do? As soon as the court action is over, he hires Latimer and puts Latimer in charge of his research and patent execution.
No kidding. So he understands Latimer's importance in terms of his ability to file a patent.
Oh, absolutely. He wanted, and Edison was great in so many ways, but he got the very best talent. So he must have said, just picture that. Here, the only African-American among all these, great engineers and scientists, he said, I want that guy, and go get him. And they got him.
So where are we now? We've had this debate going on now for years. Many people just not aware, basically, of Lewis Latimer. I think over the past 20 years or so, more and more information has come out about him. Hopefully more will come out now with the publishing of your book, which was just recently published, Lewis Latimer, The First Hidden Figure. Where do we stand now? Is it that, because there are many other people who had the electric light at the same time. You could almost argue that no one person invented the electric light. Is there a good case to be made for a co-inventor of this?
Oh, exactly. In fact, that period of time, what we call the Second Industrial Revolution, there were inventors around the world chasing electric lighting. We know about Tesla, we know about Westinghouse, Siemens in Europe. So that's right. And even within Edison's group, one of his, great advances, arguably one of his best, was that he gathered a team, basically a shop of, just like, think of Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs had Wozniak. He had all these people, these other, Ivy.
Johnny Ivy,
He gathered all these smartest people together, and he marshaled them towards great goals for society. Same with what was happening there. So yes, but the thing is, Latimer sits in that Mount Rushmore of those great contributors that brought light and the electric lighting systems and electricity to our world.
Yeah, and we call it intellectual property now. You work for a company, you come up with an advancement or something, and if the company patents it, or even if you patent it, because I think that was the same case with Latimer with Maxim, he had to assign the patent that he had to Maxim at the time. Probably the same thing with Jobs, but I think the difference between Edison and Jobs was that Jobs was willing to give credit to Steve Wozniak. He was willing to give credit to the designs of the iPod and the designs of the iMacs to Johnny Ive, and in some cases share the wealth with him as well. Not the case with Thomas Edison, was it not?
True. Edison had famously over 1,000 patents, but they were his, even though he had all these smart people working for him. And that would be true in this area, or the phonograph. Sure. And even with the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell gets the credit for that, probably because of Latimer. In fact, almost certainly because of Latimer. But Bell was competing hour by hour to try to get the patent credit versus Edison, as well as others.
Right.
Yeah.
And Elijah Gray. I think you outlined this in the book. Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, because again, part of Latimer's history is that he was he drew the patent drawings, which are very important, and I think even created the patent application for Bell's telephone some years earlier. But talk about that night, because I think it's very important in Latimer's story, in what was going on the night that Bell had to create that patent application and get it in before this other guy. I mean, it was very important to get that patent application in before something happened, was it not?
Yeah, Valentine's Day weekend in 1876, Bell had been fumbling around, and he really couldn't get everything together. He had Watson. Watson was his young engineer, but he really couldn't get everything together for the patent. And he knew that Gray was passing him by. And then he got word, and so he hired Latimer, and Latimer would come every night after his own job and work late into the night trying to put together the invention and the patent. And Latimer undoubtedly took the lead eventually on that. And so, but he got word on Friday before the weekend that Gray was going to submit the patent into the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office on Monday morning. And so they must have worked through the weekend, and they got the patent in, and they submitted the patent on Monday morning, and Gray submitted it 1 hour later. And that's why every school child learns that Alexander Graham Bell was the inventor of the telephone.
Absolutely, but he would not have been the inventor of the telephone had it not been for the work that Lewis Latimer did that night in preparing the patent application and getting it in on time, because Elijah Gray was right behind him. He was biting at his heels, was he not?
Yeah. And, Bell needed help. He was, kind of like the mad professor a little bit. So, and certainly Watson deserves credit too. Watson got credit. He was, of course, because he deserves credit, but he got credit, and he ultimately became wealthy. And Latimer was, effectively pushed to the side.
Sure. What you're laying out here makes a good case for Latimer's skill, not only as an inventor, but particularly his skill as a patent draftsman and somebody who puts these patents together. Here he is involved in two groundbreaking inventions that still affect us today, more than affect us. They're still part of our technology here today that would not have been possible. Well, let's say that the people who ultimately get the credit for it would not have gotten the credit for it were it not his skill as a patent draftsman and somebody who prepared this. Where did he learn all that from?
No, and Latimer, even though he constantly was working with PhDs from Princeton and Yale, the top engineers and scientists of the entire period, even though Latimer had a 5th grade education and had to leave school, even though he had the highest commendations, because his father had to go into hiding, but because of the terrible Dred Scott decision. So Latimer, with a 5th grade education, self-teaches himself mechanical drafting, electrical engineering, patent law, invention. He has 7 inventions himself that were patented, and several others that he probably did invent, but the credit didn't go to him. He taught himself French, German, Latin, Greek, and that's just actually the start. He wrote screenplay. He wrote plays for movies. He was published as a poet. He was an accomplished musician. Latimer did all that. So he was quite the Renaissance man.
Pretty much a Renaissance man. And you say his father, George Latimer, if I recall, was a former slave. He became a freedman, if I recall, but for many years was, for lack of a better description, in hiding as he made his way to the north.
Most of his life, he had to live in hiding after the terrible Dred Scott versus Salmon 1856 decision and those terrible words by Supreme Court Chief Justice Taney. Yes, so he had to basically live in hiding through and after emancipation. And that's because he was the most famous African American in the United States in the 1840s, maybe until Frederick Douglass started speaking out and writing. And the reason is because he had escaped. He was the most famous fugitive slave. He had escaped from slavery in Virginia, made his way in a hold of a ship with his wife to Baltimore, made his way to Philadelphia, made his way to Boston, and as luck would have it, 4 days after being in Boston, who does he get seen by? But by the head man of his slave master from Virginia, who happened to be in Boston at that time. And so this guy, the slave master, gets Latimer imprisoned by the sheriff of Boston. And what was the charge? The charge was that George Latimer had stolen himself. It was thievery.
No.
That since he was property, he had stolen himself as property, and he was imprisoned. And that was a huge spark in the abolitionist movement to free George Latimer.
So in many ways, his father, Lewis Latimer's father, George Latimer, gained quite a bit of fame, it can't be infamy, but certainly an infamous situation that surrounded him, but gained a certain amount of fame long before his son did.
Oh yeah, in the early 1840s, all of Boston, all of Massachusetts, then all of the Northeast, and basically awakening the whole North to the outrage that was being perpetrated against George Latimer. So everybody, all Americans were talking about this, North and South, and the abolitionist movement pulled out all the stops, all the great, including John Quincy Adams, the former president, was involved in defending George Latimer. The legislature of Massachusetts passed laws to defend him, and ultimately they had to pay off the slave owner a fair amount of money to save and keep George Latimer free in the North.
Incredible story. Why do you think after all these years, I mean, there are so many other people that we talk about in Black history, Charles Drew and course, George Washington Carver, we got that ad infinitum in high school and in elementary school, but Lewis Latimer was never mentioned. And considering his contributions, if not achievements, we would have heard more about him. What do you think his story has been suppressed throughout history for so long?
Even you bring up George Washington Carver, and even him. So yes, many people, many Americans know about him, but for the idea that he invented peanut butter, which everyone loves peanut butter, so
Sure.
that's cool. He didn't actually invent peanut butter, but his developments led to the rotation of crops in the entire South. And his impact on Americans and on millions of Americans and their ability to feed themselves in farming, especially in the South, was because of George Washington Carver. So he didn't invent peanut butter, but his impact, when you read the history, was much more important. And so, yes, why don't we accord? The thing is that at the time about Latimer, he was universally respected by his peers, the captains of industry, the most wealthy and famous and achieved men of the time. And he, so much so that he was made part of the elite club Edison Pioneers. So at the time, and when he passed away in the late 20s, he was universally acclaimed. But what happened afterwards? Well, we don't remember him much.
So I guess as we wrap this up here, the conclusion, I mean, if you compare George Washington Carver with Lewis Latimer, I think there were some maybe 100, 200 maybe improvements and discoveries and creations from his work with peanuts. But
Yes.
you have these two groundbreaking achievements that Lewis Latimer was part of, and yet he gets almost no credit. It seems the difference between those two are the patents or the people who filed the patents, because there's certainly nobody trying to file patents ahead of George Washington Carver, but there certainly was in Lewis Latimer's case, at least with the electric light bulb.
I would say so about the patents, but I would also not let up on history in the 20th century in the United States, where after the breakdown of Reconstruction in the late 19th century and early 20th century, through the Woodrow Wilson years presidency and the Roaring 20s, that there was a tendency in the culture to suppress the intellectual contributions of Black Americans. And so I think that it took a while, and it took decades through the 20th century before we started taking a second look. But certainly much of the culture didn't want to ascribe too much credit to our society, to African Americans.
Okay, one last time, if it were not for the patent, the ingenuity of a Lewis Latimer, Thomas Edison would not have his patent? Yes or no?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think that Thomas Edison was really good at kind of also absconding with all the intellectually, whether it was from
Some of us call it steel.
yes, and he was good at it.
Yeah.
And then he was pretty good at having people forget that that where it originally came from. So and of course he was able to bring things together to make things the industry what it was. But we don't remember George Westinghouse much.
No,
he was. It's only because of in recent years Nikola Tesla has become better known,
sure.
And hopefully we'll think the same way of Lewis Latimer before long and put him on that Mount Rushmore of the greats starting electricity, bringing it to the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think your book has certainly pushed the needle forward. ever so slightly, yeah, actually a lot, to tell you the truth. It's a great read, and has a lot of history woven throughout it. We talked a lot about that. So if you read it, you're gonna discover a lot, just not about Lewis Latimer, Alexander Graham Bell, Maxim, and Thomas Edison, but many other things that were surrounding the U.S. and the turn of the century, and things that were going on. It's a fascinating read, and I highly recommend it. And thank you so much for writing it. By the way, it's available free, is it not?
Yes, so we've made it digitally available for free in all Kindle, whatever, any form. Some companies were able to enable us to do that. And part of that funding also is for our Puff Latimer Scholarship Fund for our young African-American women and men. So yes, we're able to do that. And if you want a hard copy, probably Elliot will get an extra copy for you.
I hope I will. Stephen Mitnick, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for all your good research and knowledge, and thank you for passing that along to the Library of History. We appreciate it. Many other people appreciate it, and we thank you for joining us here on Now Tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And thank you for your company. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, then come right back here next week at 7. More of Now. Till then, take care. Peace.